Welcome back to another episode of the Bigger Than Me podcast. Here is your host, Eric P.
One of the most legendary characters of Corner Gas is Oscar Leroy. He was an absolute fan favorite. Today I'm speaking with the man who played Oscar. We discuss starting Corner Gas, where the term Jackass comes from, the impact of the show on Canadian culture, and the importance of fighting for that distinct culture here in the Great White North. My guest today is Eric Peterson. Eric, it is an honor to have you on the show. I have been looking forward to this day since I started the show, and I'm so excited to be able to speak with you. I've watched Corner Gas since I was a young man.
Since you were born, probably. It looks
yes,
like
exactly.
Even before you were in vitro, you probably watched
I was very young.
To me.
Can I first ask, how did this role for Corner Gas come about?
Well, that's a very big question. If you want to look at it, there's so many ways to look at it. I guess it came about because Brent Butt had this thing that he did, and he's the guy that thought about this character. He's the guy that wrote this character. I have no idea. I can only assume that the kind of father that I play, that Oscar is. I mean, obviously, Brent has some issues with his dad, or did. I mean, no more than I had with my own father, and I loved my own father very dearly. But you can't grow up without having a few issues about your parents. I'm sure I've damaged my children in a perfectly normal way as well. So, life goes on. So, yeah, he wrote this. Now, I can remember, it's a long time ago now, eh? It seems to me, anyway, that they, and they were going across the country auditioning people. I get an audition to go in this. I read the sides that we've had and the kind of setup of the situation, and I go, Saskatchewan. I'm from Saskatchewan. I've got to play this part. You can't grow up in a province that never has any television shows produced there. And when they do produce a television show, you've got to hire the local people. You've got to hire the sons and daughters of Saskatchewan to be in it. So when we did the part, and I immediately, it's really wonderfully written. It was consistently wonderfully written. So this part was very big. It was very attractive to me. And I could channel my own age into it, as well as I knew this type, the ball cap slightly on the side, and the kind of the kind of his stance about reality in the world that he faces. I was in my own life facing it, where everything was that was new was just stupid, and people were just stupid, and it used to be so much better, and everybody basically, other than himself, was a jackass, and I could really get behind that. In my own personal life. And it kind of reminded me of my own father. My father was, obviously much more complex than most characters we see on television, as real people tend to be. But, so that was... So when we did the audition, I don't think I've ever done this before. And Brent was at the audition. And I said... You have to give me this part. I said, I am this guy. And I come from Saskatchewan. Now, that probably carried no weight. Maybe everybody in the audition said the same thing, whether they were from Saskatchewan or not. I knew several actors that did audition for it, and some were from Vancouver. Maybe they said the same. They just lied and said, I live in Vancouver, but I'm basically from Saskatchewan. So, but
Deep down,
Saskatchewan. BC is close to Saskatchewan, closer to Toronto. So anyway, that's how it came about. But the real genius, the genius is that it is the genius of Brent Butt, basically.
So when you auditioned, did you have a suspicion you might get the part? What was that follow-up call? When did you find out, and how did that feel?
Well, I had been in a long-running, the Street Legal series, and that had gone 8 seasons.
Street Legal sucks. a classic line.
It's totally, I love saying that line. I don't think I was ever so delighted with that line. The other one I loved was, what was it? Get the F off my lawn. Hey, when the street sign fell down, there's a big letter F on his lawn. I love that one. But to turn and say street legal sucks, that we had to do many takes because I would break up laughing saying it. I'm so delighted by it. Though street legal. Anyways, getting back to Corner Gas. So I didn't know. So I auditioned for it, and then you don't hear anything for a while. And of course, immediately you go, I haven't given it to somebody else, gone anyways. But I really wanted to get into a series again. Being a Canadian actor, I mean, being in a series, a regular in a television series, it's kind of the jackpot, as far as making a living and feeling that you're a valuable citizen, or maybe not even a valuable citizen, just a citizen in your country and gainfully employed. It's a lovely place to be. And Street Legal was like that, and Corner Gas too. Suddenly you're introduced to this whole kind of routine and these wonderful people that ended up being the cast, as well as the crew, the people you don't see. It becomes this incredibly big family with some of the tensions that have normal families have, but basically you're only working together for maybe 4 months of a year and then coming back to it. So I didn't hear from him, and finally then I get this call. They want to screen test me. In Regina. Now, in my expectation when I was an actor that I would be screen testing. They want to screen test you in L.A. They want to screen test you in New York. We want to fly you to Rome to screen test with Sophia Loren or something like this. No, this was, we want you to come to Regina and screen test. Well, which was fine. My parents were still alive at that point, living in Indian Head, which is 40 miles east of Regina, where I grew up. So that was fine. But because they wanted to screen test me with the actress that was going to play Emma. And they didn't say who it was. And it wasn't until I got into Regina, and then the screen test was the next day. I went to the hotel and I said, who am I screen testing with? Janet Wright. Now, I almost fainted. I almost swooned. I fell to the floor, laughing, crying. I went hysterical. I had an event. I had a psychological event because I have known Janet since Janet was the same age as me. So at that point, we'd known each other first. We'd first met when we were 18. 18. And this was like a number of centuries before the Street Legal was being shot. So she and her sister, Susan, I had known in the theater. I had never worked with them particularly, but we knew each other from Saskatoon, where I went to university, and Janet grew up there. So I was tickled pink to think that I was going to be doing this with Janet. And it does, we went out together for a while when we were 18. Wow. So this was, this was, no wonder we kind of clicked as this old married couple. And Janet Wright she was just a wonderfully complex, kind of defies description, the kind of woman she was, and a wonderful actress. She was also a very good director, very smart, very funny. So that was a treat. And it just, as you saw, Emma and Oscar, we might as well have been those people. We had so much fun doing that. We had so much fun, being exercising the dynamic of that couple. Right. So that was. But I don't know how many big stars, international stars, have actually flown into Regina to screen test. Yeah.
You're the legendary one, I suppose. Would you mind taking me back to season 1? What I find really interesting in interviewing the other cast members was that nobody really expected this show to go anywhere, that there weren't high expectations that this was going to get renewed. Everybody, like Fred Ewanuk, Brent, they all thought they were going to have a good time, but they didn't know if it was going to be a short time or a long time. What was that first season like for you?
It was exactly that, and especially on the location that we had for Dog River in Rollo, Saskatchewan, the town that was, and that's where the exterior of course, as people would know, that was where the exterior of the gas station was, with the interior of the store, but the exterior of the Ruby was there too. So, so you'd be there, we'd be there filming, and people would drive in from the highway to get gas. And that was a wonderful thing about Canadians. They'd come in and they'd go, and the ASM would go up and say, "I'm sorry, this isn't actually a gas station. We're shooting a television series here." And people were so apologetic. They go, "Oh, I'm so sorry." As if they'd interrupted a moon launch or something just to pick up gas. They were so apologetic. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. A series, I hope we haven't ruined anything," forgetting entirely that they were now stranded with an empty tank of gas at a fake garage. Yeah, so, and I don't know. Yeah, it was just wonderful that first year. I mean, it was so fun to shoot this series. The more we did it, and we were all getting to know each other. I didn't know. I'd known Janet, but I didn't know Fred. I didn't know Lauren. All the people on the cast. I didn't know Brent, and it was. Yeah, so and the scripts were just delightful to do. They were, and these were very funny people to work with. So shooting was a joy. It was good material to work with. It was funny. The guests that were coming in, getting to know and getting to love and have tremendous affection for everybody else and the whole crew. It was wonderful. And for me, who cared about a kind of, was a cultural nationalist, wanting us in Canada to have our own film, television, theater experience and contribution to the world, as opposed to being a branch plant for the American one, or earlier on when I was first run, the British one, to be that. This was, so a lot of my theater had been new work and original work that was being done in this country. So to be shooting this television series where I had grown up, to come out at lunchtime, when you'd have lunchtime, when everybody goes in a film set, television set, and you shut down for lunch and everybody goes and has lunch and then you go back to work. To be walking and looking out at the prairies, I couldn't get over it. I was tickled pink by this, that here I was, because I had left Saskatchewan years before going, to go to be an actor, when they either had to go to I was in Vancouver for a time. I was in Toronto. I'd gone to London, England, and lived there for a while. And of course, there was always, you had to go to the United States to work, to be this. So suddenly to be back in Saskatchewan. And then having this wonderful setup where in Regina, I was 40 miles from where I'd grown up and from the Qu'Appelle Valley and Lake Katepwa, where we'd always had a cottage, and we still had a cottage. I had this ideal setup. And then my kids were young then, so my two daughters would come out for an extended period. So it was great fun for me to be able to show them where I had grown up as well. And we'd experienced the lake, and they all, helped out in the set. It was really wonderful for me to have that happen.
So I'm just going to quickly reflect on my take on season one. So I've watched the show many times, but rewatching it with your input and with Fred's input and Brent's and Nancy's has given me new perspectives on it. And now when I look back at season one, I feel like we were being introduced. There was a lot of comedy from Brent. I think it was a little bit more low key, and the whole cast was a little more low key, but one person was not, and it was you. And I think for that first season, you had those moments where it was like out of the park humor that really catches people and goes like, oh my gosh, this is hilarious. Like this might be in the weeds, but like the Taxman episode where you're just ripping through stuff and you're just like my taxes pay for your salary. Like that energy,
buddy boy.
It's just hilarious. And like everybody else was more level, and then you were just knocking it out of the park throughout that first season. And then you see throughout like subsidiary seasons, everybody starts to come out of their shell and have these wild moments, but you really kind of like showed out on that first season. And I'm just wondering your reflections on being able to play that character really fully and give energy to that.
Well, again, I felt I had a certain authority about it, both in my personal, my personal stance to the zeitgeist, that, Oscar's railing against the old fart railing against the present situation, as well as, like I said in the audition, I knew who this guy was. He was my father. He was my uncle. He was everybody else's father I knew. I just, this was a character that had met the writing that wasn't trying to be another, actor that had acted another character. I wasn't trying to be some other character from some other series and model it on that. I was modeling it on real life. But the other thing I have to say about the show is, and with acting, you can only act, I don't know how to put this, what's written. Like, if there's good writing, you'll get good acting if you've got good actors. Good actors can act good writing. Good actors cannot necessarily give a performance if it's bad writing. You really need that. It's the genesis of the writing. And Brent's writing and the writers that consistently through the series, but this was my first introduction to comedy writing. Then, like Street Legal was dramatic writing. So with the comedy writers, and they were inevitably, I think all of them were stand-up comedians at one point or another. And it made me understand that being a stand-up comedian is basically a writing exercise. They write all their own material. And listening to Brent talk about his travels as a stand-up comedian and biker bars and other venues where if you're not funny, it can be dangerous, So you learn to write well, quickly, and the hard way, as it were. So their sense of structure and timing, and they may have different language about it, like the button on the scene and things like this, or the joke or the lead up. But as an actor I had maybe different terminology about it, but totally understood this. And I've always felt terribly secure in the writing that I was having to do. I didn't have to work very hard. I just had to learn it and get into it, waist the pants. And, I remember, I loved the one where Oscar decides to build his own coffin. They go to the funeral. Right? And Oscar's going, he looks in the coffin. It's an open coffin. He looks around the coffin. He goes, "You got ripped off, buddy boy." He says to the corpse, right? And he goes, "I can do better than this, and I'll save a lot of money." So my plot through this whole episode was Oscar is decided he's going to build his own coffin. It's going to be a lot better than anyone you can buy. And he talks to people about it. And of course, at the end, he's standing in the coffin, and then it's the first time he realizes, oh, wait a minute. I'm only going to be able to enjoy this coffin after I'm dead. And so then he turns it into a bookcase. Well, it falls apart, for one thing, because Oscar, though he prides himself on his carpentry, is a terrible carpenter. So but I always loved
that birdhouse.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. So thank you for saying that about it. I loved doing that part, and it still is great fun to me. And when we were really shooting it, and when it was on television and a very prominent part and all the time, I was always being stopped by people on this total strangers coming up to me with a big grin in their face and saying, "Would you call me a jackass?" And I'd go, "Oh, certainly, you're a jackass."
Can I ask On that note, then, what is it about that character that I do think people really, really resonated with? There was something about like the off the cuffness, the frustration. Like there was something about seeing that personified so sincerely that like we wanted that. Like we want that energy, and I don't know where that comes from.
Well, again, I mean, not to sound pompous or anything, but again, when you have your own culture, that is, when you are reflecting, when you have art forms that reflect the culture within which they are come out of, as opposed to this happening in Dodge City or in as Canadians, we can translate the American experience very well and go, well, we're sort of like that, but we're not quite like that. But in this case, where you had Brent Butt, who grew up in this place, reflecting in his comic way a kind of authenticity, that this wasn't based on other forms. This was based on his own experience of the people and community that he lived in.
Yeah.
And I responded to that because I also was interested in making art or images or whatever we're doing, jokes, beauty, edginess out of an authentic experience. And that then gets verified or not verified, but in this case in Street League, it's verified by the audience who go, they then recognize their own father, their own uncle. The number of times that people came up to me and say, "You're just like my granddad." And of course, I wasn't just like their granddad. But again, so you've hit on a kind of arch. So the community is responding to, and in this case, because in the Canadian situation, they're going, it's kind of unusual because it's a Canadian show. We're so accustomed to seeing content from other places, and mainly America, that when we get to see our own and we like it and we're proud of it, it's a kind of double whammy. I get to think about my uncle and what a funny guy he was, and look at what this guy's doing, and also I'm proud. I kind of own it. It's mine. I mean, as I'm thinking as the audience member, that this is and living in Saskatchewan, it's kind of okay. It's kind of, the show demonstrates that in a way. So I think that element was very strong. And I go back again, I keep going out, you have to keep going back to Brent Butt and the people he put around him. But he's a genuine, valuable artist in this country. Very funny, very shrewd, a really wonderful guy. But he really captured something there. And in a sense, again, I go to the Canadian audience, we've been most of our film and television is 99.9%. So then when we hit something that's ours, and so even though it's Saskatchewan, well, again, that the specificity of that authentic experience of corner gas and that what they got there in the comic terms that it's presented in, that's a kind of universality that allows. And of course, in Canada, that Saskatchewan community is really no different than a BC community. I mean, they may have a slightly different accent, and they bitch about the different politicians from province to province or from Newfoundland. But we're all that, and even living in Toronto or the city, there's a community around us that has an Oscar in it and has a Fred, or it has a Hank there, and you can identify this kind of group of people, and it's a delightful experience. The other thing with Oscar was that he was so unaware of what kind of a guy he was. Yeah. He thought everybody else was a jackass. But basically, he was the jackass, and everybody else was normal in a funny way. Right. And Emma knew this and was always pointing this out to him, but she loved him. They all tolerated, they all knew what he was like. And I always enjoyed the fact that young, sort of young teenagers or that age, the 11 or 12-year-old boys, they loved Oscar. Because he said Jackass for one thing, but they loved that. The number of times, and because I then came to realize, because Oscar himself, in some ways, was no more mature than a 12 or 13-year-old kid. They really identified with him. So when a little person would come up and say, "Will you call me a jackass?" And you'd go, "You're a jackass." They would writhe with pleasure. They thought it was the funniest thing there was. It was really delightful.
Where did the catchphrase "Jackass" come from?
It came from the show. It was from Brent. Brent had a lump, and the Buddy Boys. He had a wonderful way of capturing that. And the one I loved was the Woolerton, when they mentioned the next town and everybody spit. That killed me coming from Indian Head, because the towns, the people you really hated were the ones closest to you. Like in my case, it was Santa Luda and Fort Capel. Wow. When you had to play hockey games, it's totally human nature. You can see this, and across the world, it's the next community is the real rivals.
Right. Do you think that it took off, or was Jackass, do you think, always a part of the plan? Because it did become like a staple in every season, and maybe you expected to do one episode, one scene, and then it continued every episode, season.
It did grow. It did become, and as the show went on, other people had, Lauren. What was the one he had? He had a kind of. I can't remember what the phrase was, but he had certain characteristic reactions to things. Yeah. And the Jackass really took off because, again, it was a great word. It's a great choice of words. This goes back again to stand-up comedians having this hard-won knowledge of what's funny and what isn't funny, because if it isn't funny, you're going to get killed, or a beer bottle will be thrown at you. So you better get it right, or change whatever it is that you're getting the beer bottle thrown at you for. Right. So Jackass, this double word, it's like, it's like asshole or something. It sounds like swearing, but it isn't. And that's why the young kids liked it. It was like...
Walking the line.
It sounds like this bad word. It's a male donkey, for God's sake, a male mule or whatever. A jackass is a male jackass. So, and it's a double. It's the two consonants. I mean, the two vowels. I mean, the two syllables. God, it is too bad. When you get old like me, Aaron, you have word flight. The word is there, and then it just disappears. Yeah, so when you have the two syllables like that, you can really get behind that when you want to say you're a jackass. Yeah. So, and it grew. So I used to have one maybe every second show. Then there were one every show, and then there was nothing but jackasses.
So season 1, what was your reaction? Fred talked about actually getting the call from CTV saying, we are renewing this. This is fantastic. And the overwhelming support of that first season, the numbers came in, you guys came in over 1 million. What was that reaction for you to be able to be like, wow, we actually delivered, and the audience is responding? Delight,
surprise, gratitude, you name it. I mean, I'd had the experience of Street Legal, so part of me was going, thank you, Jesus, I need another series that's going to run for a while. And this looked like it. But you could tell in a way, the week of the first season of shooting it, you're on a set, you're doing the things, you're going, you know what? This is really working quite well. It just hasn't seen an audience yet, but you're going, yeah, this is really funny stuff. The other thing I have to take my hat off to is CTV and the Comedy Network. They had a group of people that were producing it from the network that were very savvy about this show. First of all, they let Brent and David and they let the artists that were producing it run it. There wasn't a lot of executives. There wasn't executives coming in, we don't like this, we can't do this. In other situations I'd seen, an over kind of, interference by for lack of a better word, the producing side, not the non-artistic side. So they gave Brent his head, and of course it was well worth it. He knew exactly what he was doing, and if you just let him do it, he would lead you to the promised land. There was no doubt about that. But they had people that recognized that and let him. And then they marketed that very well, because our first performance, it was after I can't even remember, some big American I don't know, show that attracted 1 million people or over 1 million people, and they kept running. I can't remember what it was.
The Big Bang Theory?
It was. It wasn't. No, that series I don't think was even happening. It was some other thing like
The Office.
No, it was. It may have been a reality TV show or a music. I can't remember what it was. It's so long ago now. Anyways, that drew a big audience. It was like, say, after the World Series game or something, or, it'd be like something like that, a big audience. And they just ran ads through the thing saying, after this show, stay tuned for. And lo and behold, people did. And once you started watching it, it was funny. It was, it was funny. And again, when you were shooting it, you're going, this is funny. I don't see how people aren't going to like it. And again, I go back to the shrewdness and the canniness of the producing, the Comedy Network and CTV, and the executives there that went, yeah, this is good. We're going to keep this. And it filled a lot of boxes for it. It was Canadian content. They had this. It was good. People, it was just a perfect convergence of all kinds of considerations that. It was blessed in that way. And it was, yeah.
One of the things Lorne shared that I think was really impactful was about how it resonated with people, or the role that it played in people's lives during certain trying times. The one he raised was that he had people reach out to him who were Canadian soldiers serving in Afghanistan, and who had reached out and said, we're watching Corner Gas when we're being rocket attacked. And that's kind of our solace, our escape. What were some of the feedback you had received from the impact of the show?
Well, I never had that. I totally was part of hearing that had happened, and that situation was, it was very heartening. Again, I go back to the authenticity of the show, how authentic the show was. That as Canadians, this did reflect, in comic terms, something that was true to the experience of all of us living in this country. That it wasn't something we had to translate. That the town in North Dakota was something like us, and then again, not quite, but this was us, and this was us, and this was good. It wasn't the other trope, which is it's Canadian, it has to be bad. A kind of self-loathing about what we do and who we are. That other aspect, that darker aspect of us as Canadians, vis-a-vis living next door to this great cultural behemoth called the United States, and speaking the same language. So that whole element of it, for me, what was so interesting about the show was the number of people that said, I can watch it with my whole family. I can watch it with my kids. I can watch it with my teenagers, and we can all sit there and watch this show and have a good time. So the sense of the show bringing that aspect to it, of community or family could enjoy this, it was very satisfying to me. And again, it speaks to Brent is a stand-up comedian. His comedy is not, it's not dirty jokes, it's not bad words. It simply catches the idiosyncraticness and with a wry turn of how our lives are. And that gets reflected in the show, where things that in real life that aren't, where things like where a pothole becomes a significant event, as opposed to, the Cuban Missile Crisis or something like that. So the enjoyment I thought of the show was this aspect of the family being able to enjoy it. So I was very proud of that and in it.
This question is just coming to me now. You have a deeper connection, I feel like, to knowing all the episode specifics than like I spoke to Fred and he basically said like I can't watch myself. Like I can't review I know it went well, but like when I was trying to bat past episodes off of him, he was like, yeah, I didn't watch that, or it's been a long time. And I totally get that. That's one of the challenges of re-listening to interviews and trying to figure out where I can improve. It can be tough to see yourself, watch yourself on screen and stuff. But I feel like you have the deepest understanding of some of these episodes and have highlighted the culture in a deeper degree of like where it was really authentic and living up to its name. And I'm just wondering what that was like for you to watch everybody in their element, trying to bring their best to the table, because you're the one who kind of saw it at that bird's eye level of the impact it was going to have.
Well, that was definitely the lens with which I appreciated the show through.
Yeah.
And that spoke to my previous experiences as an actor and my kind of modus operandi as an artist in this country. I had always been, even starting in Vancouver, associated in theater projects that were new work and again, to tell our own stories, for lack of a better term to use, that well-worn term, that we'd be telling our own stories that would be original and from a perspective that only a Canadian could tell, because you had to be here, and these stories would be told to our neighbors, and they would be verified or not verified, or appreciated or not appreciated, which would allow us as artists to judge how well we were doing by our community. That we were no more important as artists or filmmakers or television producers than the doctor, the teacher, the baker, the plumber. We had a function in the community. We had something to give to the community, and the community gave something back to us. We had a role. We were no more important and no more exotic than that. We just belonged. And that model was, when I discovered this, because I'd lived in England to be an English actor, and I came back to Canada and fooled around. When I ran into theater groups here in Toronto, and it started basically in Vancouver, that ability to go, I could use my uncle and aunt as models for the characters and work that I wanted to do, that unleashed a huge burst of creativity for me. I didn't have to pretend to be, or try to be. I was going to say Brad Pitt, but though I'm a striking resemblance to Brad Pitt. It's really telling. You probably thought I was his twin brother.
When you logged on, I said, "Hey, it's Brad Pitt." Yeah.
Exactly. So that you could use your own life to as part of the modeling clay that you were going to make this for, the art out of, for lack of a better word. I know we call it content now, but it was, this television show. And that was reflected. I mean, what I loved about year after year being in Regina, people would come up to you in the grocery store and go, well, how's the scripts this year? And it was like they were asking you, how's the crop this year? There was like, you fit right in. That whole model that I've just described about having a place in the community and the contract, the social contract between the community and you as an artist, was totally fulfilled in the Safeway in Regina when they go, how's the scripts this year? Are we going to have a good crop of jokes, and things like that? Or they'd ask you about different characters. And you would be treated with respect and a slight sense of ownership that they knew you. But people weren't agog. They didn't become tongue-tied. It was lovely. And I really enjoyed that. I had the ambition while we were shooting the show that I wanted to thank every Canadian that loved the show. I wanted to thank them personally. Janet Wright used to kill. She used to tease me unmercifully. That she'd see a tourist car, people would come up, and I'd be over there. Hello, I'm Eric Peterson. She'd go, "You're such a suckhole," she'd say. Yeah, they're going over, because she was very shy about fans. Janet was. She didn't she didn't want to be around them. I, on the other hand, became, Mr. Host. Hello, welcome. This is the set. Hello, yes. Thank you for watching this show. It's so important. Yeah.
That's such a beautiful philosophy. I just want to linger on that for a second because I think we sometimes forget why we do things or what the purpose is. And the one piece that I really liked of what you said, within my First Nations culture, we have this idea of Tommyuk, and it's you look back 7 generations and you try and learn from them. And I think so often I use learn as if it's just like teachings, like how to make stuff, how to make a good casserole, those types of things. But there's something to what you just said of like learning the idiosyncrasies, learning the humor, learning where their head was at, and kind of taking that with you too, so that when you're in new circumstances, you can go, how would this person looked at this new situation? And that's one way that they can almost stay with you.
Yeah, it's very true. And it's also something that is that kind of originality. And original not in you've discovered something brand new, but original because you are the only point of view. All our points of view are unique. I mean, we all see things slightly differently, and that difference comes from where you're standing and the eyes you're looking through. It comes from the kind of education, neighborhoods, cultural experiences, everything we've had. You build up this world that you perceive the rest of the world from, and it's very important if you can reflect that in terms of television programs or theater pieces or whatever, films, that information is a gift to the rest of the world, it seems to me. And the same way their perception, like in Yugoslavia, if you see a movie or something about that, and you suddenly go, there's something about that imaginative connection that is so... I mean, all that joins us together is imagination, basically. And when we exercise it in art, that's the fundamental joy of it. You're not conscious of it, but to go, I get that in a way. It's sort of like my life, but this connection, this imaginative connection called a television show, where everybody's pretending, making believe, bravely. And I say bravely because it takes a lot of guts to get up there and pretend you're somebody else. Let me tell you, it doesn't look as it all sounds like fun and games, but it can be stressful. The audience responds bravely. They also get let out their imagination, let it run loose a bit. And then you get to experience other people in a way that we don't, that's wonderful, it seems to me. I know that's all vague, very vague.
No, I was just about to say that might have been the coldest cut of all my episodes. That the thing that connects us all is imagination. Like when you said that, I was like, whoa, I don't know if we've had like a deeper quote on the show, because that's true. And that is when people sat down and it was the whole family, every character represented them in some sort of like their family or who they knew. It all brought them together and it was being reflected back to them. And that's why they were willing to enjoy the show and be so supportive. I don't know if I've ever thought of it that deeply before.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think, I often said, especially in theater, I go, the play is simply an excuse for theater to happen. And by theater, I meant was that you have a bunch of people at the same time, in the same place, letting their imagination go through the story. And that experience is so counter to the real to the other experience that we are all individuals. You live alone. You're born alone. You live alone. You die alone. Which is the other extreme. I mean, that's true. But this power that we have of imagining, and then imagining the other, there is a bridge then that happens between us. that my understanding now, it's not, I don't experience you totally, but I do get to connect with you in a way that is only possible through art, it seems to me. And even watching a painting, there's something about the joy that a human being has of that imagination being exercised. Is why we've always done it, I guess. Sung, danced, made plays.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
There's one quote, it's, I think, your most legendary quote, and I want to recite it back to you because I think it was the thesis of the show. I also think that it is a huge opportunity to remind people of this path, and it's the last episode. It's your last rant. Why the hell settle? We never settled. I'm a paperboy one week. You teach piano the next. The next week, Lacey's a hockey coach. Wanda's a real estate agent. Hank's an accountant. The cops have a radio show. We all try new things. And I, for one, want to see Brent up on that stage standing in a bucket of yogurt. And it just, the juxtaposition's beautiful, but I love that because I do feel like one thing maybe we're learning or trying to figure out is to just find hobbies, find passions, find things that interest you, then drop them and try something new next week. Like, you are able to chase whatever goals you want to set for yourself. You are the only person standing in the way of living a full and meaningful life. And you saying that as the last kind of big statement at the end of the show, I just thought tied the whole show in a ribbon for everybody.
Well, that's Brent, eh? That's Brent Butt's writing.
It's just beautiful.
It is. It's a wonderful bucket of yogurt. I'd forgotten all about that.
It's really good. Can you tell me about what it was like to go through the animated series and the movie? Like, do you miss those pieces at all, or are you okay? Can you close the book?
I didn't want the series to end.
Right.
I mean, I'd gone through the the 8 years, the 8 seasons with Strictly, and in a Canadian series, I said, "Are you kidding? People just love this show. The ratings haven't dropped. The ratings are as strong as ever. Let's ride this pony into the dirt. Let's take it as far as it'll go." But Brent and Nancy wanted to do they wanted to do other things. So and Brent wanted to they wanted to leave on a positive note. I didn't care. I wanted to I was already becoming a submerging artist. It's going to be downhill anyway. So let's ride it as far as we can downhill. So I was sad that when we ended, but you're always sad. I mean, the series that I've been on, I've always been, when they say we're not going to go next year, it takes a day or two to get over your grief about it. And this was no different. I was delighted that we were going to do the movie, and I was delighted with the movie, and that the movie was really just 3 half-hour episodes put together as a movie. So they didn't change anything. Again, I can't speak, as you've heard, I can't speak too highly about Brent. I just can't. Yeah. He's just wonderful this way. So that was fun. The cartoon was a hoot. The cartoon was... I loved doing the cartoon. The cartoon was, this was a chance for Brent. I just was so delighted because Brent always wanted to be a cartoonist. He wanted to have a cartoon. So suddenly he could do it. This was a way, and the whole thing about the shooting it live was there's certain parameters. You can't have Martians coming in. You can't have, suddenly turning into, I don't know, whatever the kind of, but in the cartoon, you could, because you just had to draw. We just had to draw it. I mean, it sounds simple. I mean, talk about complicated. Anyway, the other thing I liked about there was a group of us here in Toronto, and then Brent and Gabe and Fred and Lauren were all in Vancouver. So they would record. We all recorded at the same time. So we'd do the episode just with the connection. So they'd go in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we'd be at 1 o'clock or something in the afternoon here. And we got to visit again as we were recording the episode. We got to visit. Oh, how you doing? And things like that. So that was a wonderful connection, as well as the great thing was we were all getting older. You know, I mean, when we started the series, I'm 78 now. I don't know. I was 65 or something. You know, it was, or between 60 and 65. Look at me now. I'm older than I'm older than I've gone into the land of the immortal now in film and television parts. I have to play Zeus, or Santa Claus or a vampire. That's my category now. I can't play a living person anymore, other than if I was a cadaver, I could use my body. In fact, I often thought of getting my publicity shot with the kind of oxygen thing well lit, so I can do cadaver. I could hold my breath. I don't know. So during the cartoon, we were all getting older. Suddenly, there's Fred. They're getting gray hair. Lauren, I couldn't believe it. They were all becoming. But your voice doesn't. Your voice at that point, anyways, didn't. And I used to laugh. I mean, you spoke before about it's a bit of it's always to a certain extent disappointing watching yourself, because acting you're inside it. You're not on the outside watching it. So naturally, as you're on the inside acting, there's part of you that thinks, I must be just like Brad Pitt. I'm sure I keep referring to Brad Pitt. So that when you see yourself and you are nothing like Brad Pitt, it's a bit of a shock, because while you were doing it, you felt you were Brad Pitt, but then you see you're not. So even though I can look at myself and go, okay, it's like hearing yourself, on a tape recorder, your own voice for the first time. You're kind of shocked about how different it is. But you do acclimatize yourself to seeing it. And you don't, especially in film, when you're shooting it, it's a coherent scene that you're in. She says this, he says that, I say this, he says this. But then when you watch it, it's cut. So you're going, why did they cut away from me there? I did such a wonderful thing there. You can be complaining about yourself. You're not in control of it. So you see it put together as it's to be, as opposed to, and then that makes you realize I was just raw material when we shot it. I was like copper ore, and then it got refined when it got edited.
Right.
But and where was I going with this? There was something I was going to. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
No worries. We were just talking about switching over from the animated.
Oh, the animated. That's
freedom.
what we wanted. So to see the animated me, I loved it. You could watch yourself without any kind of going, and I looked just like I thought I would look as an animated character. And my big joke was, I learned more about acting. That guy's acting. The cartoon Oscar. I could do this now when I acted. I thought it enhanced my live performances when I brought my cartoon experience to bear.
One other piece on this that I think you've done an excellent job of is really highlighting the people who made the show possible. And that might just seem obvious to you, but I do think that there's something about like lifting others up and admiring their craft, and admiring Brent Butt and David Story for the storytelling. And your ability to do that really stands out to me as something that's important, because when you're on a team, you can be very inward looking on, what am I doing? Am I showing up okay? Am I doing a good job? But you've, throughout this interview, done such a good job of like highlighting what other people were good at and what you admired about the show and what they brought to the table. And I just want to appreciate you for that, because I think there's such a deep lesson about the role we can play when we do give people the other leg up, and then when we do put shine on others. And I'm just wondering if you have any other reflections on the cast and what they brought to the table, or the cameraman.
Everybody did. I had such affection for it. And And the acting of they're all wonderful actors on that show, and wonderful people. I, you know, and again, the art form itself, theater, these are communal art forms. You know, you can have one-man shows, but it requires the expertise of people in a group. And that's the beauty of it. It can also be part of the hell of it, you know, because we're all human. So to put something forward, to get something, it's fun and not fun at times. But that's only to be expected. That's the best we can do. And I think it's such a wonderful activity for people to do, to spend their time trying to make something silly and funny, as opposed to getting together to kill other people or to, you know, blow up this or destroy the universe or the planet. It's so nice that people can get together just to make a joke and make other people laugh. It's a high calling to me. The fact that it was being shot in Saskatchewan also made it. What's important, what was to see that by that happening there, everybody that now grew up in Saskatchewan, as opposed to myself and Janet and not everybody that hadn't, had this example. Oh, you could do this. I could be a stand-up comedian. I could be an actor. I could shoot films. I could be a director. I could have this. And that was so important to me, too, to see that you didn't have to go someplace else. You could do this. And people could be inspired by this as a career choice. When I was growing up, when you said, I'm working in the theater, they go, what do? Do you take tickets? You know, there was no idea that you would be an actor. I grew up, nobody I knew was an actor. Nobody I knew anybody who was an actor. I mean, it was not on the radar as a possible way of living. And suddenly, by having people do this in Canada, wherever it is, suddenly there's this whole other opportunity to do what I just said, which is to make funny jokes. It's a high calling. It's worth it.
You've advocated for this for years. In a CBC interview done 12 years ago, you were going on about how you were fighting for Canadian film, television, and theater, and that you believe that having strong Canadian content that reflects the Canadian culture is important when we are so often overlooked because of what's going on in the US, because they have such a strong film and TV industry and theater industry that it's hard for us to get our shine. And I look at the landscape right now, and to be honest, it couldn't look worse during this period right now from my perspective. We don't have shows like Corner Gas bringing everybody together in the same way they used to. We have a lot going on in the US that's overshadowing everything going on in Canada right now. And so I'm wondering, what is Canadian content from your perspective, and how do we fight for it?
Well, that's a big question now. I mean, I grew up and as an adult, and my artistic, you know, the kind of artistic experience that I searched for and wanted to establish in this country. The country that I imagined I was in is not the country that we find ourselves in now, Canada. I think that there's been a lot, and one could argue, or one could say that part of the conversation that hasn't happened is this coherent Canadian culture. And that not the results of that we see, part of the results, or what's fed into what I see as the country is really on shaky ground. We're all in different communities. The federal, the Confederation itself seems to be at war with itself. The federal government against the provincial jurisdictions. These are highly contentious kind of divisions between us. And then there's other issues. But again, partly that's due to culturally we've changed. We've changed. We're looking at, I looked at it as an old white guy. This was the candidate I talked to her. And that perspective, quite rightly, has been said, that is a point of view that lots of people in this country don't share. And we want to look at it from those people like First Nations, like yourself. If I look at it that way and tell their stories, then I can get behind that, because it's the same impulse I had to tell my story. And again, the same imaginative interchange happens. When I see a story there, I get to be able to imagine and therefore join some experience that I hadn't understood or thought about. So the other thing I just want to say is my tendency, my passion for Canadian culture, or this, basically, let's let our own originality out, has been a constant theme in Canada since, ever since we seem to have, especially in English Canada, a deep affection to be a colony of some sort for some reason or other. The other big issue that's changed all that now, and so where when I talk of, this is very old-fashioned what I'm speaking of, and really it seems to me very relevant right now. The other thing is the internet, the kind of interconnectivity, the digital interconnected of people. So geography has disappeared in a way. You can be in Regina and not feel, and still be totally coherent and current with New York, if you want. We don't have the same sense of land and space, because we're all in a virtual space now. Well, you all are. I'm not, as you just pointed out. You can't find me. I am under a real rock someplace.
Yeah, I had to hunt long and hard.
In Ontario. He's living under that blade of grass over there. He's not on the internet. So, so what is Canadian culture now? I mean, I do agree there are all kinds of strains in this country, and in my lifetime, but there is in the world too. It's not just in this country. All our democracies, all our liberal democracies, are under various strains of other. The world is much more unstable and unsure than any time I can remember in my adult life. And so we're not alone in that. And I don't know. It's funny, today we're talking, this is when Trump comes to power in the United States. And for his remarks in the last 6 weeks have brought Canadians together more than I've seen in a lifetime, and not in a lifetime, but in the last little while. So, who knows what's ahead? I still want to work. I still prefer. I just did an audition for a terrible audition for an American thing that's being shot here this morning, and I still want to do something that's Canadian. I want to do something original. That's all I ask. I want to know. I like to work on somebody that says, "Let's do this. Let's tell this story." And that, I refer to my advanced years. The parts for 1,000-year-old men are few and far between now, but I'm waiting to do any one of them that they want. As the 1,000-year-old guy comes up, I shall be there to try my best. Anyway.
How about Wise Man? I think that's a better fit for your category. I think the piece that I'm taking away from this is that the reason that I'm such a fan of doing these interviews with you, Lorne, Nancy, Brent, Fred, and yourself is because I'm living off of the steam, the energy. I'm riding those coattails and waiting for something else to come along that reflects back to me our culture, and that is, to your point, like more risky, more challenging. And like some of the jokes you guys had in those early days, they were bold for the space that existed at the time, and letting those producers, the executive producers, run wild and come up with ideas. It was so refreshing. But I do think this is an opportunity for us. I had an article go out where I talked about how I think this is allowing us to look at the flag, look at our culture, look at who we are, and try and get back on the same page. We don't have to agree on everything, but we used to have a few things that we all agreed on, and that humor, that sensibility was all found on a show that you were instrumental in helping bring to life and give us that connection. And I think a lot of the people who tune into these interviews on Corner Gas are all just trying to grab on to what are Canadian values, where are we, and want to hear that back to them. And I think we're just sorely waiting for something to come to life that reinvigorates that in us.
Well, again, even talking about this, who knows what that will spark in anybody who's listening to it, as to just the idea of it is important. You know, we can't dream about something we've never thought about before. We can't move towards something unless there's some sort of indication that there could be some way out, towards that. And but it is a tough time. You know, by my estimation, this is a tough time. People are, you know, it's hard to share at the moment. People are very defensive, it seems to me. You know, we're all in different, points of view, and they are, yeah. So, but who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I'm just so thankful that I had Corner Gas. It was a rich experience. It continues to be a rich experience for me. And and talk about luck. You go, if I hadn't been born in 1946 in Saskatchewan, I wouldn't have been of the right age to play Oscar Leroy. What a bit of luck that was. You know, so like in every kind of, life, you have to, I totally want to, and if Brent hadn't been born when he was, and Janet Wright and Fred, and, we wouldn't have met, so the huge, I appreciate, I'm so grateful for this huge amount of whatever, fate that allowed us to do this. And again, I'm so grateful that Canadians responded to it and still respond to it the way they do.
I couldn't agree more. Eric, I want to thank you personally. As I said, I watched the show growing up as a kid, and it really shaped me. But your character also had a huge influence on me. I am not afraid to speak my mind. I am not afraid to speak up on so many things. And a lot of that was watching your character so boldly and bravely speak what his opinions were. Again, you might not agree, you might disagree, but I think that was so valuable, because I do think people are afraid to speak up, and all that they need to do is speak up on their worldview, and nobody can take that from them. And I think we need to give people that permission again. And I think that's what your character did for so many, is I'm going to say the thing, and maybe it's not perfectly well said, but I'm going to say what I think the truth is. And I think there's so much admiration that I have for you, and it's been such an honor to be able to speak with you today.
Well, thank you very much, Aaron. It's been a pleasure talking to you too, really, to think about all these things.
How can people follow your work?
They have to come to Toronto.
Toronto? And are there any shows coming up?
No, I haven't anything. I just finished over Christmas. I was doing Into the Woods. Yeah. This was my first musical. And I've decided to pivot to become a Broadway star.
Wow. Just getting warmed up on the Broadway shows,
I'm off to Broadway.
I can't wait.
There's no business like show business. I think they've been waiting for me. No, and I'm just doing a workshop now on an original play, but I haven't anything lined up at the moment to see. I'm submerging, as I said. I'm slowly sipping below the waves.
Well, you have a huge legacy for so many to aspire to work towards. It's been a blast speaking to you. I love your sense of humor, your lightness and your energy. It's just, it's been so refreshing to speak with you today.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we'll meet sometime in person.
That would be an honor.
Are you in Vancouver as we speak?
I am, yes.
Yeah. Good. Well, yeah. And Tim, of course. Thank you, Tim.
Yes. Tim, come on out. Let's say hello.
Tim, come on out.
Yeah, get out here.
There you are. You look just like your portrait, Tim. That's where you go.
That was delightful.
They're twins.
I was just smiling my I was actually, because Brad Pitt became a recurring go-to for you, I went to the internet and said, how old is Brad Pitt? And he's 61. So I think if you're talking about relating yourself to a current leading man, you need to scale down just a little bit. But I guess
I should have said Paul Newman. He was the guy that I always grew up with, and then there was a wonderful story about Paul Newman. I'll just bore you with this story. I was doing Street Legal, and Joanne Woodward was his wife, right? And she was doing a theater piece here at the Royal Alex, and one of the costume people on Street Legal came in one day and said that her aunt had been getting, this was in the summer, a Baskin-Robbins ice cream cone. And she put the ice cream cone, she got the ice cream cone and she put it in the stand in order to open her purse to get the change. And she looked up and she looked into the eyes of Paul Newman. And she was so flustered, she closed her purse and fled from the Baskin-Robbins. Got outside and realized she'd forgotten her ice cream cone. So she went back into the store and she went to the rack and there was no ice cream cone. And suddenly beside her was Paul Newman saying, "Yes, I am Paul Newman, and you put your ice cream cone in your purse."
That's amazing.
I thought it was a wonderful story about how people were flustered by it. That never happened with Oscar. Nobody ever put their ice cream cone in a purse by talking to me. They just said, "Would you call me a jackass?" So,
one more piece on Street Legal. You're almost legendary because you have these catchphrases. But I was going through some past videos, and one that you did, your line had "Tom fuckery" in it, and all the comments were like, "That is my new line: is stop the Tom fuckery."
That's so long ago now.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. Oh God, I'm all out there in this virtual world that I don't know about. It's just as well.
It's for the best. It's all
for the
peace.
best. I know it's for the best. I'm still just going back under my rock and blade of grass here, somewhere in Ontario. Yeah. Okay, thanks you guys. Hey, is that we got it?
We got it. You're the man.